Welcome to the LP Podcast in the USA Prime East Texas studio. Don't forget, like and subscribe.
Welcome to the La Pointer Podcast in the USA East Texas Prime studio. Today we have John Alen with us and my co-host, Aislynn Hannigan and Wyatt Miller. And today we're just going to talk about John's life and what he's done. So to get that started, where are you from?
I am born and raised in Athens, Texas. So local guy, joined the military after graduating high school, and then 27 years in the military, and then retired, and then came back to Athens, Texas with my two boys who also go to Athens, 10 and 12. So my wife's not here to tell me, how old the kids are. So, so had a good career, and now I'm back because this is where I was born and raised, and this is where I want to make sure my boys are get to grow up at as similar as I did back when I grew up in this same local community here.
All right, so for the people who don't know, what is your career?
So I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school. I joined the Marine Corps, with the contract of being a military policeman, and then throughout that career, it just took me different places. I spent my first 14 years in the Marine Corps overseas, meaning not in the United States, and that took me to American embassies. Guess my first place I went was Algeria. That was Northern Africa, and then from there I went to Bosnia. And then from Bosnia, Budapest, Hungary, then Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and then came, went to Okinawa, Japan, and then from Okinawa, Japan, had a, deployment over to East Timor. Then from Okinawa, Japan, went to Bamako, Mali, West Africa, and then Bamako, Mali, went to Saudi Arabia. And then during all that time, 9/11 happened. Sure none of you all were born yet. And then, that kind of changed up what was going on in the military. So then everybody was deploying and going to Iraq or Afghanistan. So, I hadn't been yet. So leaving Saudi Arabia, I'm like, hey, I want to go to the first unit that's deploying to Iraq, which they were happy to oblige that. And then, so when I came back to the States, going to California, I was going right into a workup and then going to Iraq. And then when I returned from Iraq, I still wanted to, do overseas things. So then I went to Naples, Italy, to NATO. And then from, NATO, I came back to the States, went to MARSOC, which is Marine Special Operations Command. And then from there, went to Quantico, Virginia, where I then kind of got in and started my presidential time. And then going to HMX-1, which is the Presidential Helicopter Squadron. And then from there to the White House, and then retirement. And it all happened that fast.
Wow. You got that. You've been everywhere.
Yeah, you literally went everywhere and did everything.
And it all goes by real quick, so people are like, man, you're gone for 27 years, but, to leave, a small community like this and travel and go someplace, and then you come back, I know his dad very well. We kind of grew up, as kids together, but when you come back, you just kind of fall right back into the things. I live out in a rural community, on a farm. So, that's what I like to do. And that's where I spend most of my time. And, my wife asked me yesterday if I wanted to go to Palestine. I said, why? It's beautiful weather. I'm going to stay here on the farm and do farm stuff. So that's what I did. And that's and like I said, it all went by pretty quick. So over to you all to ask all the questions that you might have.
So you said, did I cut you off?
No, I was just going to ask, well, where was like your most favorite place to be? Like, what was your favorite?
So, I mean, if you delve into any of those countries, what we consider hardship tours and things like that, so it's not there's places that you can go, especially on embassy duty, that, are places you'd want to go on vacation. So when I chose my places where I wanted to go, I always wanted to go to some place that you couldn't go on a vacation, or that you wouldn't want to go on a vacation, or that you could never go on a vacation. So
Yeah.
I like the hardship post. That's kind of what I wanted. I wanted the thrill and the adventure of going to places that were in turmoil and that were, I guess, more, just what it was. It was the hardship post. So, so for me, a favorite place, in terms of, action and things like that I was seeking and looking for, those were my kind of favorite places. But then as I grew up and got older and kind of just wanted to settle down and go to the nicer places, I mean, being stationed in Naples, Italy, that's where, my wife and I, then we were able to travel through Europe and do all the kind of nice things that, you would kind of do at a cool place to be stationed.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
So you said that you were, I don't know how to word this. Hold up. So you said that you transport the president like in the air.
Mhm.
What would you say is the most complicated part about that?
So it depends. So, when it comes to presidential duty, as the security chief for HMX-1, my job is to secure the aircraft and make sure that wherever we're moving, so wherever the aircraft are located, we provide security for that aircraft. The Secret Service provide the security for the president himself. But then, we provide the asset to fly him, when it comes to that helicopter. And then there's Air Force One, the jet and things like that. So the complicated part would be, where the president's going and where he's flying to, and to ensure that, his safety, for that helicopter, so he can travel and do the things that are all presidential. So, it kind of depends on what he's doing. So for us, there was times, when you see the president, you kind of expect, like, what is the president doing on a day-to-day basis? He's at the White House, he's doing presidential stuff, but, he's also the face of the people, in terms of, if there's a catastrophe somewhere, the wildfires out in California, or there's a hurricane, or the floods that, were recently in North Carolina and Kentucky and things like that. The president's going to go to those places, and he's going to meet with the people, and he's going to see the people. So whenever the president goes to those places, the helicopters obviously are going with him. So we don't fly those helicopters all over the United States. They get put in the back of a big old C-17. We fold them up, and you load them up on a big cargo plane, and then we fly to wherever that location is. And then depending on the terrain, and if it was let's say when we went out to California and we did the wildfires out there. Well, now you have smoke, you have the fires that are actually happening, you have all the first responders that are actually out there trying to put out the fires. So one, you don't want to get in their way. Two, you got to understand that you're landing a helicopter somewhere, and what's going on around that place where you're landing a helicopter. So it's a logistical thing to make sure that you're putting the president in a safe place to then where he can then get in his motorcade and then travel to some of these places. So it's just a logistical game. And then when we travel overseas, I was fortunate enough to go to North Korea with the president when we met with Kim Jong-un, for the first time, and kind of getting to see that and being behind the political curtain, so to speak. When they meet at the DMZ, or when they met in Vietnam and places like that. So we have to take our helicopters there. So it's logistics. Now you're working with local governments and stuff like that, because we're going to either store our helicopters here, or we're going to fly here and we're going to land here. So it's just logistics and making sure that, everybody's on the same sheet of music. But when the president is flying, we own the airspace. So he is the most, I would say there's no one that is more secure than the president when he's traveling and he's moving. So if it's a motorcade, if you watch it on TV, you just see everybody lined up on the streets and everybody's kind of pushed back, and he's, motorcading along on his vehicle. So when he's flying in the air, you shut down the airspace, so nobody gets to fly within the airspace in which the president's traveling in. So, it's all logistics.
Logistics. All right. So in situations where like you would have to fly out to like the fires in California, how would you handle that level of catastrophe, like you personally?
So one, we take all of our military members that are with us, so it takes a sizable force, of, folks, it's just, you got pilots, you got the people that are maintaining the aircraft, that put them back together when they come out of the helicopters. And then you have to go out and you have to, we would always fly the places where before the president ever gets on the helicopter. We'll fly to a location. We'll make sure that where we're landing, that's good. A good logistical place for him to land. It's safe. There's nothing around that's going to be dangerous for him, security wise. And then, there's the people, the people aspect of it. Everybody wants to see the president. So then you have to make sure that, there's barriers that are set up that people understand, like that they can't come past these certain points. And it's not only for the safety of the president, but it's for the safety of them as well. We have MB-22s that fly in support of the president. And these are big helicopters with the rotor, but there's a lot of downdrafts. So when those helicopters land, I've seen them blow tree limbs off,
wow.
trees, just as they're flying over. There's a lot of downdraft. So, it's a safety aspect for the people as well, that when the president's coming in on the helicopters, that there's a space there for us to land, do our job, get them in the motorcade, and then travel off. But, when it comes to President Trump, he's a man of the people for sure. So he's always kind of going off cue and does his own thing sometimes. And he'll want to walk over and see the people. So you got to make sure that, the helicopters are shut down and nobody's walking in. There's blades and stuff spinning. So everything has to kind of be shut down and everything like that before he goes and wants to talk to the people. And if he ever seen police officers or firefighters or something, he always wants to stop and get out and take pictures with them and just thank them for the jobs that they do. So.
All right.
What are some of the main key leaderships you have to do on a daily basis?
Like in general, like growing up. So I'll give you the long answer because this is a podcast, and y'all want long. So going into the military, in the Marine Corps anyway, they start teaching leadership right off the bat. Like there's always someone to look up to that is leading you, but at the end of the day, that you're becoming where you're a squad leader or a fire team leader or a platoon sergeant. So you start getting put in leadership roles early on, and then there's as a young leader, you're looking forward, like you all probably have leaders and your teacher or a coach or something like that. You have someone you look up to, and then inevitably there's good and bad. So as a young leader, you're looking at the good and you're looking at the bad. You're looking at like, hey, that is a leader, but that's not how I would do it. Or that's a good leader, that's how I would do it. I'm going to take something from that good, but you got to take the good and the bad. And that then starts building your leadership personality and how you choose to lead. So like as you go through the military and you're doing different things in the military and you're put in leadership positions, that one, you earn that leadership position. You're not given that leadership position, you earn it. So, through your merit and your leadership, you're gaining more and more responsibility as you grow through your time. And then there's things that you can you put in for, like, hey, I want to do this job, so I'm gonna put my name in the hat. And then there's a board, and then there's you have to go sit on a board, and then you have to get questioned by board members, so that and that's all stress related as well. So how do you handle stress and chaos and things like that? So a lot of young people, they look sometimes at I'll just use myself as an example. I've had people say, I want to do what you do. Yeah, but you're 18 years old or whatever. You just joined the military. Like, I have 27 years of experience and leadership roles. You can't just go from here to here. You have to do your time. You have to do the smaller leadership roles, and you have to prove yourself, as a leader as you grow into different leadership positions.
So, like, if someone came up to you and said, I want to do what you do, what would be some of the advice you give them to be like, this is how you get to point A to point B?
So, initiative, so, a lot of times, sometimes, and I'm just going to use like current, like, so whenever I was young, obviously we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have the social media and we didn't have the things like that. So, where some folks, they post things and they want the likes and they want the this and, the instant gratification, so to speak. There is no instant gratification in certain leadership roles that, where you're like, man, I want to be you now. Well, you can't be me now because it takes time. So I would say have initiative, and strive to take those leadership responsibilities and roles. And I'll use this as an example. So after I retired and I came back, I was helping, my cousin, with his farm stuff, and they had porta-johns. And then the porta-johns needed toilet paper, so I went and got toilet paper and I put in the porta-johns. And someone asked me, like, wow, did you ever think that, you have worked at the White House and you'd be changing out toilet paper in a porta-john? I'm like, it needs to be done. Like that's something that has to be done. So you take initiative, you do it. So I don't care where I've been or what I've done. We collectively, we have to take initiative to do the right thing. And well, that's the right thing. It might sound minor, but the next person that came to use the porta-john, I'm pretty sure they were happy that there was toilet paper there.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you got to take initiative and put yourself in a position to be in those leadership roles, because sometimes we just want to sit back and wait for somebody else to do it, or someone else to take that responsibility. And you have to own responsibility, both good and bad. As a leader, it's easy when your team does a great job and you're like, yes, I'm the leader of that. But when your team fails, you also have to own that. And why did they fail? And what can you do to make sure that you improve that and what you do to win? So leadership is hard, it's stressful, but you have to be able to take, some people are good followers and some people, are good leaders. Some, people like, are you born a leader, or did you go to school? Did you read a book? Or, yeah, I mean, those are all things that you can do in order to get to be in the leadership roles that you want to be in, just for knowledge base. But, really to me, it's action. Is getting out there and actually, accomplishing what it is that you set your mind to do. And that's all part of leadership to me, and, having that initiative to strive to get to that point.
Aaron,
What's up, Colton?
did I tell you the LP podcast and the Fantasy Football Fallout now has a studio sponsor?
You didn't. Who is it?
USA Prime East Texas.
Really?
Here, you can look at it.
Okay, so I guess this is their ad read. So USA Prime East Texas is a select baseball organization based out of Tyler, Texas. So that means it's local. With 100% placements of all athletes in college and full professional coaching staff. And part of the largest full-service select baseball program in the country. We are honored to be chosen to help your son with his dream of playing college baseball. Come join the Prime family and you'll see why we're different. And that's our studio name sponsored.
I know, that's
So
pretty sick,
USA
Aaron.
Prime East Texas Baseball. Go check them out.
What's one thing about your job that people would be surprised to learn about?
People that know me from just growing up around here, they're always surprised that I actually even worked at the White House. They're like, how did you get there? But my mom, she hardly ever knew what I do. My mom too is, if she ever watches this podcast, she'd get embarrassed. But, she came up to the White House one time and, I had her come up and see me. And, for her, that's a big deal. She, small town America as well, so she was pretty, like set back, and she's like, where's your costume, is what she asked, some of my colleagues there in the office. And they were like, costume? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, Mom, it's a uniform. I'm in the military, I wear a uniform. But she used the word costume, so everybody got a laugh out of that. But so it just kind of goes with that, it's just people are surprised that, to me, I'm you, like I grew up and I went to Cayuga there for a while, like small schools, like we come from a small school, small community, but what it is that you want to do and what do you want to strive to do, like me, I always wanted to go in the military. So that's something that I was always going to do, and I had my mindset that I was going to go into the military. Did I ever think that I'd, retire from the White House? Absolutely not. Not in a million years did I ever think that I would ever have that opportunity to serve, in that capacity. But through opportunity, through initiative, through volunteering, like, yep, I'll do that. Some people don't want to do the hard things. Some people don't want to go to the hardship places. Some people don't want to do that, but I did, and I always, wanted more. So as, and that led me to where I was. I'll just tell a quick story, so when I was young, just joined the military, we had recruiters that came into our military police course, and they were looking for volunteers to go to HMX duty, which is the Presidential Helicopter Squadron. And I was like, man, that would be awesome. That sounds so cool. So, of course, I raised my hand, went to the interview, did all the stuff, got interviewed and all that things, and I didn't get accepted. Why did I not get accepted? Because when I was in high school, I did things that I probably shouldn't have done, and that kept me from being able to get the clearance I needed in order to go and do HMX. But 22 years later, here I am in that very classroom where I was 22 years before, and I'm the one that's standing in front of all the classroom, and I'm the one giving the brief, and I'm the one that is recruiting those young people, because I did the right thing when I got in the military, and my past, I didn't let it define me and what I was and who I was. So therefore, I was able to then tell those young kids that were like, hey, I want to do this. I'm like, yep, can't do it now because you were like me in high school and you got in trouble or you did the wrong thing, and you're not going to be able to get the clearance. However, if you do the right thing, it comes back to the leadership thing, and you kind of give them that advice is like, one day you can be me and you can be here. And although I didn't get to do it then, here I am in charge of the whole operation now. So there's a give and take, of things that you do and how you do it and what kids do on social media these days. Because whenever I was sitting on a recruiting panel, I'd have 4 guys. I had a psychologist with me. I had one guy looking at social media. I had one guy looking at your medical. I mean, I had all these people on my board, my panel. And as I was talking to a young military member, that they would, look at the screen, and I'd be like, just kind of looking at their social media, because sometimes y'all don't make your social media private and you post things on there that you probably wish you wouldn't have done when you get older. And then you forget to take it off, or it's still there. So, I can ask all kinds of questions about social media, like, hey, tell me about this pastor party, or tell me about this, so you have a girlfriend or you have a boyfriend, or, so you ask all these, questions based off of, what is already out there in open source social media. Thankfully we didn't have that, but, what we did have was police records. And I had some of those from just, being young and dumb and growing up in rural Texas here. And, so, I mean, you can go above and beyond what you are now and what you want to be and what you strive out to be.
Yeah. Did you ever have a call sign?
Yeah, we had call signs like in certain places, like on embassy duty, so what we call a reactionary team. So if anything bad was going on, so we were the security for the embassy, the Marines were, so we're called Marine security guards. So we'd get call signs because we had radios. I mean, it was the normal Texas stuff, Lone Star was one of my call signs. What was some others? Murdoch. I don't know if everybody watched the 18. Yeah. Yeah, I remember 18. Murdoch was the crazy guy that was in the loony bin. Yeah, loony bin. So that was me. I was Murdoch. I was the crazy guy, that like I had an ambassador tell me one time at the embassy, he's like, hey, like we need to put you in a glass case that says break only in case of emergency. So when he said that, 18 was a thing back then. So they were like, like, oh man, you're Murdoch. Like you're that guy that's kind of nuts all the time and just wants to be crazy. But so good times.
Yeah. I have actually another one. Do you ever talk to any of your buddies you made in the military still?
Oh yeah. So I mean that's a family. So I would say that you make lifelong, like it's a brotherhood for sure. So yeah, I mean, I talk to them all the time. They come out to the farm and we blow stuff up, and it's always very loud whenever all my buddies do get together and they show up at the farm. So yeah, still have lifelong commitments to them, but I mean I have lifelong commitments to Gold Star mothers and fathers too. I mean I had Marines that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, so even for them you have that lifelong commitment with those parents. I had the honor to take one of my Marines, back to leadership. Sometimes leadership is hard. I had a Marine that was killed in Afghanistan, and his family wanted me to bring his body back from Dover back to his resting place there in Colorado. So I mean that was an experience that like I will always have. And leadership is hard. So when you take a service member a casket, and you fly into an airport, and that airport's totally shut down, and the fire trucks are there, and they do the water spraying, and it looks like an angel wings kind of. You go through it, and you get out, and you're taking that flag draped casket out, and you're giving that their son back to their parents and their family members. I mean, that's a hard thing to do as well. But that's part of it's part of leadership. It's part of stepping into the role, and that was an honor for me. But it was hard because that mother, she was very angry. And as any mother would be, that loses a child. And I think that to this day she's probably still angry with me. But like anytime that family calls me, and I just got a call from the father the other day about something that's going on in North Carolina. And he was like, "Hey, can you be there in August?" I'm like, "Absolutely." So it's a commitment that whether it's a lifelong friend that calls and says, "Hey, I got an issue or a problem, can you help me? Can you be there for that?" Or if it's a parent of a service member that one says, "Hey, can you reach out to him because he's being a knucklehead?" Or two, "Can you be here for this event that is honoring my son?" Then I'm there for sure.
Yeah.
So, like, what's next? You said you were retired, but are you going to stay in Athens, or is there another step to what?
No, so yeah, I'm retired. My family, like I said, I want my boys to be raised in the same community in which I was fortunate enough, I say, to grow up in. So we're back, for sure as a family. I did, consult with the Trump campaign when President Trump was campaigning to be now the 47th president, and there's a good possibility I'll go back. I was back in D.C. a couple weeks ago at the White House, and then so probably here in the next few weeks, to a month, I'll probably be going back. But I'll go there, and then I'll come back, and obviously to see my family. But my family will stay here, and I'll just kind of go back and forth.
So, like, how long would you be in the White House before coming back?
I didn't give them a set time. I'm not going to sign a contract with them to say, "Hey, I'm going to be here for your entire 4 years." But I mean, there's a lot going on. I mean, if you watch politics right now with the things that are going on and what he's doing, so being there as a military member, and military members are apolitical, so you don't care who the president is, you just serve the president, so like it doesn't matter who the president is. I mean, I was there for the transfer of power between Trump and Biden. The helicopter's still got to fly. The support to the president still has to happen. And so you don't get wrapped around who the president is. You just serve, the president. But me now as a civilian, I have my preference. I vote the way I vote, and I helped out the Trump team, and I will go back and continue to help out the Trump team as a political, appointee, not necessarily a military member. So there's different roles that I can do.
So, when you're serving as, when you're serving the president and you're, in that stretch of time where you're not considered a civilian, do you vote?
Yes.
Okay,
So it's the right of every American. Every American, when you turn 18, you should vote. I mean, that's your right, and that's where, when it goes back to the military, there's a lot of servicemen and women that have given their lives for what it is, the freedoms that we have. And that's one of the freedoms that we do have is to vote. And having lived and served in so many different countries and really hardship, post, and places, like we have it so good. Like, I mean, I even told my wife this morning, we're just, watching the news, and it's going back and replaying the things in Hamas, with the paragliders flying over into Israel, and, and how that all kind of started back in October 7th. But you see that, and we don't have that kind of fear here in America. We live our day-to-day lives with pretty much no fear, and especially here in La Pointe. Did you fear coming to school this morning? Nope. Do you fear what's going on, in the world? Not really, because it doesn't really truly affect us. But so yes, vote, and as a military member, yes, you still have the right to vote, and you should vote. And but at the end of the day, the commander in chief is the president for us in the military, so we follow the orders of the commander in chief, regardless of who that is.
What would you say was the hardest thing to adjust to, going from serving in the White House and being in a role of power and leadership to just coming back here and working on your farm?
So so I was always torn, like my whole entire 27 years of being in the military is like my heart has always been here, so like I love the rural community. I love living on a farm. I love, farm life, so like if I could, be two people at one time and be in two different places, I would have been here and I'd have just, embraced the small town community and the farm life. But then when I'm there, like, so when you go back to asking, who do people think you are? What do they think? People don't know me for what I did. People know me here, and I don't bring what I did there back here, so to speak. I don't, there's no, I don't have a sign out in the front yard like, hey, look at me. I worked at the White House. Like, that doesn't matter to me. I'm humbled. I'm grateful for the experience, but, that doesn't translate to what I do on a day-to-day basis. Like sometimes I got my earbuds in, I'm, out in the hayfield or whatever, and I'm talking to somebody, and they're like, what's that in the background? I'm like, I'm baling hay. So for them, they look at me and like, what? You're doing what?
Mm-hmm.
Like they can't see me sitting in a John Deere tractor, because they can only see me in a suit and tie, up at the White House. They don't see the me who I am here. And just like a lot of people here don't see me, there. I was grateful for the opportunity. That's one of the coolest things for me, like working at the White House, was being able to afford other people the opportunity to come to the White House, because not everybody can just walk up into the White House. So me being there, and being able to give people that opportunity to come inside the White House and see the White House and see it on a different level, watch the president take off from the South Lawn in a helicopter, those are all experiences that you only get on TV or standing out at the 20-foot tall gate, outside the perimeter of the White House looking in. So to be able to go in and see the inner workings of what's going on in the White House every day, that's a pretty neat experience, in itself. So to then be able to share those experiences with people that I know, and, people call me and, podcasts go wild now. They're like, hey, I can call that guy and I get a free ride into the White House. So like, I always gave people the opportunity. If I knew they were in town and they were coming up to DC, like, yes, come on in, I just thought it was a great experience for them and for me to be able to provide them that experience as well.
So you've been, like, how you said, you've been 7 years in the military.
Mm-hmm.
How many medals did you get while serving? Like,
I don't know. I mean, some of them, I used to always kind of, because I always, like, I strive to be a leader. I always wanted that leadership position. So like for me, I would give up anything. Some things you get, is right place, right time kind of medals, like if you go to Afghanistan, well, then you're getting that medal. If you go to Iraq, you're getting that medal. If you, are with this unit that did this, well, then you're going to get that ribbon. Go to Marine Security Guard duty, you're going to get that ribbon. So, I'd say, the gimmies, like you're going to get what you get, but, and then sometimes you look at folks and that's how you kind of, for us in the military, sometimes we look at another military member and you can tell where their career has taken them without ever even talking to them, because you kind of just look at the ribbons on their chest, and say, well, okay, well, that person, you either instantly have a connection with that person because that they've walked on the same dirt you have and done the same things that you've done. So you kind of have that immediate connection with people. So I'd have to go count. I think you've been to my house. In the barn,
yeah,
so
I have.
You probably took a picture and then you
actually, my mom
count.
actually took a photo of it. She took a photo and sent me, and I looked at that wall and I was like, "Dang!"
So you'd have to count them, I guess.
Well, count them and get back to us. Why?
Okay. I'll count them. I'll count them. But yeah.
But there's like, there's no award that I've ever received that I when it comes to personal decorations and things like that, as a leader, you don't get any of that. Like all the recognition and accolades and everything that you get is because of what your team members do and what your Marines do and what your service members around you do. So, I mean, anything that I've ever gotten and was awarded was because of the folks around me, not necessarily of me personally. It was them. Yeah. And that's leadership to me, like, and having that ability to be able to build a team, around you, whenever I got orders to the White House and whenever I got orders to HMX, whenever I got orders to Mars, like all these places I've ever went to, there's always that sense of, you're a little bit nervous because, you don't know what that job truly entails until you get there. There's no pamphlet or book you read before you go to that job and says, okay, here's everything you're going to need to know and do while you're at this job. So, as a leader, I look to the people that are around me. You guys do podcasts. I have no idea about a podcast or what that board does. So, I rely on you to do that. I rely on you and then cut out all the things that I said that y'all don't want. Just chop it out. Like, that's you guys. You're a team. And you make this podcast work. Just like if I'm anywhere else, that's what I always kind of prided myself on, was I had a great ability to be able to build a team. And then, being in leadership roles, you have that ability to pick your team members and bring people on that need to be there. It's kind of like what's going on, in politics right now. You got a new president in town, so he gets to pick his team, his cabinet members, his, people that are on his staff. So you got to build a team around you, because one person by himself or herself is not going to be successful without, those that are around them to ensure their success.
This podcast is brought to you by the Bronze Cactus on the Square in Frankston. The Bronze Cactus is the go-to spot in Frankston if you're looking for the latest in boutique styles. They have fashionable dresses, cutesy tops, and all the jewelry you'll ever need, and so much more. Go see Ashley, Holly, and the whole crew at the Bronze Cactus on the Square in Frankston today, or call them at 903-574-5789. That's the Bronze Cactus on the Square in Frankston.
What would you say was like the hardest lesson you had to learn serving in our military?
To be humble. At the end of the day, growing up as a leader, and then you start getting in them certain leadership roles where you can challenge authority. So you just have to be careful in any position that you have. It's when, you get in that position where you can then challenge authority, and you can have those disagreements. Everybody's going to have a boss, like everybody has a boss. There is nobody that does not have a boss. When you go to church, you got a boss. Jesus, he's boss. So we all have a boss. We all have a higher, someone that's going to probably tell us what to do. And I've had multiple disagreements with my boss, but it was behind a closed door. And then you got to understand that, you can have your disagreements and you can have your challenges with that leadership team sometimes. But at the end of the day, you have to have that unified front when you come out of that door and you go back in front of the troops and the military members or your service members. So, having that joint front then helps them do the things that they need to do in order to accomplish the mission. So in some areas it's good because I'm a Marine. So, the Marines are a little bit more harsh and we're a little bit more, in your face kind of, militarily. But, once I started serving at the White House, it was a joint force. So I had every single service member from every service, working with us at the White House. And, there's 3,000 something odd folks, and when you have 3,000 folks to manage, you rely on those mid-level management, those other service leaders to do that. I can't do everything by myself and know where everybody is at all times. So you rely on the team and the different levels of leadership to make sure they're managing the things they need to do.
What is do you remember much from boot camp?
Yeah.
Because I have, my older sister's in the Navy.
Yep.
And she told me that the most memorable part of ever being in the military is boot camp.
It is. Just because for most folks, they go from their life. So when you go to boot camp, that's to strip your identity of who you thought you were and make you who they want you to be. That's what boot camp is all about, is to take your identity. For males, you go in there and they shave your head, so you got a beautiful head of hair, all brushed over, looking like Justin Bieber or whatever. But at the end of the day, they chop it all off, and and then now everybody's the same. So they take your identity and they make you all one person, and and the things that you did it as an individual, you don't get to do as an individual anymore. Everything is team building. So if you're going to to the dining facility or the chow hall or whatever to get food, you're marching there and you're all in step. You're all doing the things, everything you do is as a unit now and not as an individual. So, I mean, for some people that have never played sports or never been in a team environment, for them, that's just mind blowing to them. They're like, oh my gosh, somebody's yelling at me and I got to get dressed. When they say get dressed, I got to get undressed. Every single thing you do in a boot camp environment, I think is probably all services across the board. Some are harder, some are easier, some are shorter, some are longer. But at the end of the day, I think across the board, it's to remove your identity of who you were and make you part of a team going forward and accomplishing whatever mission it is. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you got to understand the military, when we fight our nation's battles. So, I gotta, when it's something as simple as like, hey, you got to shave your face every day, in the military. Well, that's something you have to do, but it becomes repetitive. And if you're doing it this way and it's repetitive, well, at the end of the day, if we're in a battle and I tell you like, hey, we got to charge that hill right there. Yeah, but they're shooting at us. Yeah, I don't care. Like, you will go up that hill and we will, accomplish the mission. Well, then as a team, we're running up the hill and we're gonna fight the enemy. So at the end of the day, you're building a team from boot camp to the end result of being in battle and fighting our nation's enemies and ensuring that when I tell you to do something, you have that willing obedience to order and like, okay, I'm going to do exactly what you say and we're going to go do that. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to get your mind to understand that. And as a civilian that's never been in the military, you're like, man, that's kind of crazy. But once you go to boot camp and you start kind of reforming who you are as a person and then becoming part of that team, well, then it's just natural. Like, hey, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So what would you say was, like, in your opinion, the most common civilian misconception about your career?
I mean, if I go back to like the White House part of it, people are like, oh, you work for President Trump, and I would tell people a lot of times, like, nope. I was like, we serve at the pleasure of the president. So I mean, that was a misconception. It's just because, I served. I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, I wouldn't say I was a Biden guy either because I definitely wasn't. That's not how I voted. On the civilian me says that, but on the military side, it didn't matter who. It doesn't matter who, the president is. We as the military, we serve at the pleasure of the president to ensure that the president can be presidential. Because at the end of the day, I don't care who the president is. I mean, I care individually, but as a nation, I want what's best for our country. I want what's best for the world. So I want to ensure that we have a president that can project worldly power, because in strength, that's what stops wars and that's what keeps wars from happening. So we want to have a great grand military, but at the end of the day, the goal is to never use the military in fighting another country or fighting in a war somewhere. It's deterrence. You want to deter a war from happening. So in order to have a strong, president, a strong military, you're going to ensure that war doesn't happen. So that's the main goal. So I would say that's a misconception, is that.
Yeah. Just real quick. So, like the Russia and Ukraine was having a war.
Right.
Like, so did you personally, do you think like we should have got involved, or do you believe like we should have just stayed out of it?
I think through leadership and I think through power, in America being that power, we kind of, they've said and presidents have said in the past, like Obama said for Syria, like, here's the line in the sand. If you do this, then we're going to do this. Well, then we don't do it. So then that kind of projects weakness. And like, okay, well, they're just all talk. They're no do. And it's like right now. So, what happened under the Biden administration and Russia, going into Ukraine, and, still it's a sovereign country. You feel for the people, you feel for the destruction. I've been in plenty of countries that, are war torn and just totally, disseminate, just destruction is beyond anything that you all can fathom, because we don't see it. Like you see it on TV, and it's one thing to see it on TV, but we've been desensitized to certain things because you see it in a movie or you play a video game, and that's just what it is. So you kind of get into that place like, oh, well, that's just, it's on TV. But when you've actually been there with boots on the ground and you've kind of seen an entire, town just totally destroyed, and then you start thinking like, wow, that could be our town, you can't really get your head wrapped around, how serious that is. So, I think what we're doing now, and we're, telling Russia like, no, we need to stop. I mean, there's been over 75,000 people killed in that country. So, whether it's on the Russian side or it's on the Ukraine side, every soldier or civilian that's been killed has a family member. You know, so a lot of times you just kind of, you don't think about that. You don't think about, you see, oh, and like 75,000 people have gotten killed, so they're just all soldiers. Well, yeah, but they're a dad, they're a mom, they're grandparent. I mean, whatever, aunts, uncles. So that's the hard part. So like, should it stop? Absolutely, it needs to stop. How is it going to stop? It's gonna stop through leadership, and it's gonna through power, of our military, and and holding the line. So when we say as America that we're going to do something, well, then we do it. If we say that we're not going to do it, well, then we don't do it. And then that too has, it's equal power when we say we're doing it or we're not going to do it. And then it lets the world know, like, okay, because we're an American power. Everything and everywhere I've ever gone, people look to us as Americans, that we're just, I mean, to them, it's unbelievable. What they see in the movies is America, to them, that they see this grand, whether it's the cars or it's the movie stars or whatever, they just kind of see that as like, wow, you're American. Like, everything in America is just perfect. We know it's not, and we strive to be the best that we can be, and all that. But, we're not in sometimes those leadership positions that, we can affect the bubble around us, but, you start getting into the worldly politics. So, I don't think, of course, I don't think Russia should have, attacked and went into Ukraine. When Russia broke apart back, when the Soviet Union broke apart and all these countries became their own countries again and broke away from the Soviet Union. I mean, those countries were their own countries at one time anyway. And then, after World War II, they kind of just made their empire a little bit bigger. So at the fall of the Soviet Union, when all those countries broke off and they became their own countries, but I mean, it's always deeper than what we see and what we think. It's about mineral rights. It's about, it's about different things that are going on in that country that, and that's what makes people a world power. So when you start thinking about the world power of a country, what makes you a world power? Well, some people think it's nuclear. Well, some people think, well, you have the ability to drill oil. You have the ability to harvest the minerals that you need to build the things that you need to build to make you a military power or a technological power, or whatever the case is. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to do while you're in town?
I'm pretty low key. So I mean, for me, like, me and my wife would tell you I would never go to town if I didn't have to go to town. But I go watch my kids play sports, and I go pick them up from school. So I'm about as low key as you could possibly imagine. Like, to me, to just be on the farm and do some tractoring, I'm totally fine with just, being as low key as possible. So, I mean, we got out of school yesterday. We went fishing, it's a beautiful day. So like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to spend the time with my kids that I didn't get to spend prior to, retiring and coming back. And, and they understand too that I could potentially be going back to the White House here pretty soon, but they understand it too they understand that I was there before, and they remember me being there. And they understand the seriousness of being in a position and having the opportunity to go and serve again in that capacity. So, it'll be hard on my family to go and go back to the White House, but they too still understand the service part of, putting yourself out there, even though it's difficult for the family, it's difficult for, me to be away from my kids. But there's a service part of it that you have to, and your faith and everything that you do kind of tells you that, like, if you're being called to serve, well, then you go serve.
Well, that's about to wrap it up with John Alen. Thank you for coming in and everything you did and serving for our military. Just thank you. And that's going to wrap it up for the La Pointer podcast.
Don't forget, like and subscribe.